hand over the podium. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Good morning. I'm Senator John McCain of Arizona, and I'm joined by my colleague in the Senate and Chairman of the Homeland Security Committee in the United States Senate, Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin. We'd like to just make a couple of brief remarks, and then we'll respond to your questions. There's a lot going on in the world. There's a lot going on in the United States of America today, as we know domestically, but we are here at this conference to talk about our need for unity, our commitment to NATO, our alliance, and the challenges that we are facing, which in some ways are unprecedented. And we happen to be here on the anniversary of a terrible attack that took place here. And our thoughts and prayers remain with the families and loved ones who perished in that terrible event. And I hope that we don't forget it, because it's obvious that acts of terror are being perpetrated all over Europe and all over the world, but all over Europe as we speak, as short a time ago as a couple of days ago in Westminster. We are fully committed to the NATO alliance. We are fully committed to asking our allies in the alliance to increase their contributions to 2%. There has been significant progress in that direction amongst a number of the NATO members. But we also like to remind our colleagues and friends that over 1,000 members of NATO, young men and women who serve in Afghanistan, have given their lives, and they responded because of Article 5 of our alliance, and it was not their countries that were attacked, it was the United States that was attacked, and they went far away and served with honor and sacrifice. So I don't think we should forget that contribution of our NATO allies to our common defense. Obviously, the biggest issue that's dominating the news of late is Russian cyber attacks and interference in our elections, allegations, and apparent evidence that they are trying to affect the outcome of the French election and perhaps the German election. Cybersecurity is one of the greatest challenges that we face. The United States still does not have a coherent policy and strategy to combat it. And on our Armed Services Committee and Homeland Security Committee, we will be continuing to work with the administration to develop a policy, which then will have a strategy, which will then address issues such as, for example, is a cyber attack an attack of war? Is how much interference or involvement in people's privacy does the government have in order to try to counter these cyber attacks? In case of a cyber attack, what is the level of response? So there's a lot of those issues that need to be sorted out, not only in the United States, but amongst every nation in our alliance. So we're happy to be here back at the Brussels Forum. We're grateful to the Marshall Fund for all the many services that they have provided, and an opportunity for us to meet and discuss and the issues that are surrounding our nation and our alliance today.
Well, thank you, John. Thank you, Karen, and thank all of you for being here. It's just my privilege to be traveling here to Brussels with, let's face it, Senator McCain is a real friend, probably the greatest friend I think the world has in terms of peace and stability, because he understands that the only way you gain peace is through strength. And so John's just an incredibly important voice, so it's just a real pleasure to be here with him. We both thought it was very important to come here just as a symbol of, from the United States Congress, of our unity, our support for NATO and for our European partners. Because of the tragedy that this anniversary marks, where so many innocent lives were shattered, certainly brings into perspective that we are all under threat. as Chairman of Homeland Security, Government Affairs in the United States Senate, we see the challenges that we as a civilized world face, and we have to face these things together. So, John and I are here to have this important dialogue with the Brussels Forum here. We've got to share intelligence. We have to, because we share the same experience. And that's really why we're here. And so with that, I'm happy to, and John and I are happy to answer any questions you have.
Sorry. Kim Dozier from the Daily Beast, and I have a question for both of you. Senator McCain, you talked yesterday about speaking daily with Secretary Mattis, HR. Do you also speak to Rex Tillerson, and do both of you? And do you think that he needs to attend the NATO ministerial to send a signal that the U.S. backs NATO? And then my second question is for both of you. Does President Trump need to verbally condemn Russia's attempts to hack the U.S. election and other acts of aggression, as other members of his national security team have?
So let me quick address Secretary Tillerson. He invited the Senate Foreign Relations Committee to have lunch with him 2 days ago, and really laid out, basically some of the top issues he's dealing with very early on in the job. So what we're certainly doing is giving Mr. Tillerson the space to get up to speed on so many of these issues. He's already done some extensive traveling. He obviously wants to attend the ministerial meeting, and they're going to do that. They've worked out the dates. I think there was some confusion, some misunderstanding there, but he always wanted to attend that, and there's just some conflicts. So he certainly made this a point to us. There was no slight, there was nothing intended from that standpoint whatsoever. It's strictly a scheduling conflict. He, like John and I, realize how important this relationship is.
I think that one of the aspects of the confusion over the NATO ministerial is, unfortunately, he doesn't have a team there at the State Department. And I think it's incumbent for the President and the administration to get people nominated and confirmed. I think Senator Johnson, who's a member of the Foreign Relations Committee, would affirm that that would be a rapid process. And you can't expect the Secretary of State to conduct all his calendar appointments and others, and I think that he has repaired that. I was at a phone conversation scheduled for the day before yesterday, and scheduled for this week, that I would have with Secretary Tillerson, and I look forward to that conversation. And one of the issues that I'm looking forward to discussing with him, as well as General Mattis, is lifting the restriction of the use or supplying lethal defensive weapons to Ukraine. Vladimir Putin has stepped up his aggression in Ukraine. Ukrainians are dying, and we need to give them weapons with which to defend themselves.
What should President Trump say about Putin?
Well, I think it's pretty well known my views of Vladimir Putin. I'm still honored by him sanctioning me. I hadn't planned on going to Siberia anyway, but I would very much like to see the President address this issue, including the issue that we continue to wrestle with. It's going to be with us for quite a long time, and that is the Russian interference in the last election. There's a lot of answers that are required. I have said before that this is one of these scandals that is a centipede. There's going to be lots more shoes to drop. And so I think it's very appropriate for all of us to condemn Russia's attempt, which we know is true. We have no evidence that Russian interference changed the outcome of the election. We have no evidence of that, but we have ample convincing evidence that they tried. That is a very serious thing.
This is Federico from New Europe. A question for Senator McCain. Changing a little bit and going towards Asia, China. How do you think we could build up a positive collaboration with China? China is more and more important international stage. What's your...
Well, there's no doubt that the Chinese have asserted what they believe is correcting a anomaly of history of the last 200 years. The Chinese have clearly articulated their goal of being the major influence in the Asia-Pacific region, filling in the islands in it, which is totally violation of international law. The use of certain weapons, installing certain weapons on those islands. They now have an air expression of the ability to project power, and their continued Chinese behavior. And I think that we have to strengthen our ties with Japan, Korea, other nations in the region. I also believe that the North Korean efforts at acquiring a nuclear weapon to put on a missile that can reach the United States of America is maybe the most immediate crisis that we face. And putting in THAAD in South Korea is a very good step, but the key to it, to North Korean behavior, is China. China can rein in North Korean behavior if they choose to. And it's very disappointing that China has not exercised discipline over North Korea, particularly when there is a potential for a serious confrontation. And the United States of America would have its security in jeopardy if North Korea had a weapon on a missile that can reach the United States of America. The aberrational behavior of this fat kid in Pyongyang is not something that we could find to be in any way rational or trustworthy.
Well, I'll only add that I know this, the problem in North Korea is a top priority of this administration. Secretary Tillerson talked about it. He immediately started talking about China's ability to influence that, so that's really the first test. Long term, I'm a business guy, I've exported product to China. I would like long term to view China as a 1.2 billion person market for American products. That's long term. So how do we avoid confrontation? China doesn't want confrontation, but they're going to move aggressively if we don't show strength and resolve, and I think that's the way to approach them.
By the way, could I finally mention one other issue, long term? The largest functioning democracy in the world is India, and I believe that there's a lot of commonality of goals of democracy, of rule of law, of a lot of areas where and militarily, that the United States can dramatically increase its cooperation and activities.
Nick Fiorenza, I'm a defense and aerospace journalist based here in Brussels. That last session made it quite clear that there are no good options for either conventional or nuclear for Korea. I mean, what options do you see? I mean, the Japanese ambassador was actually raising the possibility of strike capabilities and not ruling out nuclear weapons. During the campaign, Trump was actually even raising the possibility of Japan becoming nuclear. I was interested in hearing what you Senator McCain, have to say about that, and Senator Johnson. Is it time for the U.S. maybe to start thinking about defending or protecting U.S. cities on the West Coast, even maybe formulating plans for evacuating them in a crisis?
First of all, could I just respond to that last point? No, we're certainly not anywhere near that point. I believe that the nuclear umbrella, which is the United States' commitment to protect Japan and Korea so that they do not have to have a nuclear inventory, is still valid, and I would do everything I can to maintain that. and that would be through affirming our commitment to maintaining the nuclear umbrella for Korea and for Japan. I am convinced, as I said before, that our first step should be to tell the Chinese that they need to rein in North Korean behavior. It is not in China's interest to see a confrontation between the United States and North Korea. It is not in China's interest to see a nuclear weapons confrontation that can put the world on edge. And that would be our first option. Our second option, in my view, is to develop our defensive capabilities so that we can prevent the launch and ballistic capabilities of these weapons of North Korea to reach the United States. And we do have anti-missile defenses that we can employ. But last of all, frankly, do I want to right now predict that there's going to be nuclear exchange or nuclear launch from North Korea, because then it ratchets up the tensions, and there's a number of options we can explore and pursue before we have to think that there's going to be a nuclear war between the United States and North Korea. Do you want?
Well, I would just reinforce the fact that missile defense is key. I don't think we've been building up our missile defense. I mean, Senator McCain will talk about the way we've hollowed out our military. So we've got to rebuild our military. We have to strengthen our missile defense. We need to make sure that our nuclear deterrent is modern. I think that is certainly degraded over time. We need to make sure that we have a strong defensive capability.
I just don't, I believe that the Kim Jong-un is aberrational, but I don't think he's suicidal.
What do you think will be the impact of the fact that the so-called Trump Care law was withdrawn from the Congress and didn't pass? What will be the impact on the Trump presidency of this?
First of all, I don't want to be engaging in self-fulfilling prophecies. For a number of reasons, there were problems with that bill, which is why it wasn't passed. And so I think as lawmakers, we have the responsibility to continue to take a look at the damage done by Obamacare and do everything we can to repair it. Secretary Price is going to have capabilities within his regulatory authority to take a look at some of the market distortions that have driven premiums up, for example, that have driven up the cost of health care. So I think right now Secretary Price ought to concentrate on removing those market distortions so that premium costs can actually come down in the individual market. We can start repairing that damage. And again, I think we need to continue to work in Congress to figure out exactly what the long-term replacement for Obamacare that simply hasn't worked. So we'll turn our attention to doing everything we can to grow the economy. That's regulatory reform. You know, we're going full bore right now on Congressional Review Act, peeling back some of these very harmful, very costly regulations that don't have a real good benefit to the economy. I think we'll turn our attention to tax reform. We have a completely uncompetitive corporate tax system, or total tax code in general. So there are a lot of things we can concentrate on. I'm just not, I'm not willing to throw in the towel. We've got a lot of governing that we need to do, and we'll do it.
First of all, could I just say that Obamacare in my state and across the country is imploding. So doing nothing is not the answer after this setback. We have to work on fixing what is causing premiums to go up in my state of 125%, the co-pays and deductibles going up by the thousands of dollars. So Obamacare is imploding. So we need to continue our effort to make sure that all Americans have access to affordable health care, which is not the case today. Second point is, one of the major sources of frustration that we Republicans felt in 2009 is that we were not consulted when Obamacare was rammed through the House and the Senate. It might be a good idea now for at least an attempt at outreach to the Democrats to see if there aren't areas where we could come to agreement on, because the system is still broken, it still needs to be fixed, and maybe there are areas where we could get agreement with the Democrats. That won't be easy, and it may not happen, but we at least ought to try it.
Thanks. Michael Birnbaum from the Washington Post here in Brussels, but if I could continue with the Washington question. What would you say went specifically wrong with Trump's strategy on this healthcare reform, healthcare passage? I mean, if the Republicans can't unite among themselves to pass this top legislative priority, I mean, what meaningful role is there for Democrats? And how does that disunity impact the rest of President Trump's legislative agenda?
Well, first of all, obviously, when there's a failure, it hurts. That's just a fact. If you're unable to achieve one of your legislative goals that you announced at the beginning of the administration. But it's also recoverable. And if we could get, as Ron pointed out, some meaningful tax reform, that would mean a lot to the American people. If we can get a budget, if we can increase our defense spending to the point where we can rebuild our military after 8 years of disastrous Obama stewardship of our national security. Look at the world today. So there's a lot of good things that we can do. And as you know, Washington, D.C. is a very transient business. We have a tendency to focus on today, and now we should be focusing on tomorrow. So I don't know if the Democrats want to cooperate or not. I know many Democrats that I'm very close friends with who are interested in saving health care and making sure that every American has affordable health care. So I don't think outreach to the Democrats can do a bit of harm, not a bit of harm. And I know there are many of them who are just satisfied to see this effort fail. There's others who care about Americans who, as I said, in my own state, it's imploding. Americans in my state, Arizonans in my state, are not able to afford Obamacare, period. So let's hope that we at least could attempt to do that. The approval rating of Congress, as you know, is 14%. We're down to paid staffers and blood relatives. There's not any more that approve of us anymore. So maybe a little bit of the example of Ronald Reagan, who reached out to Tip O'Neill and the Democrats in a number of areas, that we could try that for a change. But the issue of health care is not going away. That is going to force us to examine a lot of other options, because the Obamacare as is imploding and is not sustainable. In my state, there's one health care provider. When Obamacare came in, there was 12, okay? So to think that, okay, it failed, game over, no, the game is not over.
I guess I'd like to address the problem of slogans and rhetoric. I took a fair amount of heat from the right flank when a couple of years ago, after Obamacare was implemented, I started talking about, yeah, repeal and replace. It's a nice buzzword, it's a nice slogan, but it doesn't describe what we need to do moving forward. I suggested what we ought to focus on is repairing the damage done by Obamacare and working to transition to a system that actually works. Now, had we actually used, that's not a slogan, that's actually directing what we needed to do, I think we'd be in a far better place. But we clung to this repeal, replace, recognizing that was offered wasn't repeal. It was partial repeal. And it just wasn't working, and it wasn't focusing on the damage, which is really these skyrocketing premiums that Senator McCain's talking about. The fact that in his state you've got one insurance company. There are a couple counties, I think, a third of the counties only have one insurance carrier. That's not increasing competition. That's going to not bring the cost of health care down. So we need to focus on, first, looking at what damage has been done by Obamacare. I think that's how you get Democrats involved as well. They're the ones that created this mess. They're the ones that did real harm to real people. But Republicans also have to realize, well, a lot of people benefited from Obamacare. this is a new entitlement. We have to recognize that reality. When have we ever pulled out a new entitlement? So, I'm a business guy. I'm, manufacturer. I've solved a lot of problems. It starts with looking at the reality of the situation, establishing achievable goals, and then developing strategies to achieve those goals. So right now, the achievable goal is identifying that damage, trying to get Democrats to help us repair their mess, bring down those premiums. And I think once we've done that, we've gained the confidence of the American public. And oh, by the way, you could actually tie reduction in subsidies, which, let's face it, we're $20 trillion in debt. We got a real problem here for American taxpayers. So once we have brought down premiums, we can tie that reduction in premiums to reduction in subsidies where people don't get hurt. Because we've also said we don't want to pull the rug out from under anyone. So we've set ourselves up with this slogan, repeal and replace. We've overpromised what obviously we weren't able to deliver. Now it's time to start underpromising and start delivering.
Could I just add one additional point? I've already heard that they said, okay, well, we'll wait till Obamacare collapses and then we'll address it. I'm not sure we should do that to the American people. I would not like to tell X million Americans that their health insurance is in danger. I just don't, I'm not sure that's fair to the American people to do that.
Nazir, European Western Balkans. Question for Senator McCain. About Montenegro, why do you consider the NATO accession of Montenegro to be so important, taking into account it's a small country with less than 2,000 soldiers? And also, how do you see the Russian influence in the Western Balkans region?
First of all, we had a hearing on Thursday with our head of the European Command, General Scaparrotti, who is our top military person in the region. I asked him the question about the impact of failure to bring Montenegro into the NATO, and he said would be an absolute disaster. He said it is critical that we bring Montenegro in, and the consequences of not doing so could have a ripple effect throughout the region, as you point out, is already unstable. I'm happy to say that on Monday we will begin the process of a vote to close debate and then move forward with a vote on Montenegro. I'm very happy to say that, and I'm totally confident that the vote will be in the 90s in favor of Montenegro's inclusion into NATO. The second part of the question was? We know that it's well known that the Russians attempted a coup in Montenegro. It's well known that coup did not succeed. You can imagine the influence that it would have if we refused, if the United States of America had turned down Montenegro's application for entry into NATO. And I would remind everyone that in order to become eligible for membership in NATO, you have to go through a very long process of commitment, of defense, of all kinds of actions that are taken so that you can be a contributing member of NATO. So I'm guardedly optimistic that we will get this done early next week and move forward. Then there will be 2 other countries, as you know, out of the 28, and once they ratify, then Montenegro will be. It's a small country. Geographically, it sits in a very interesting place, as you know. And yes, I am very worried about the tensions and the competition and the potential for confrontation in the Balkans. And it requires attention of the European Union, NATO, and all of our allies to try to calm some of these possibly impending crises. Yes?
Miriam Elder from BuzzFeed News. Senator McCain, you've called for a select committee on Russian interference in the U.S. election. What are you doing behind the scenes to push for that and make sure that that happens? And in terms of concern, how much is your concern that Russia was an independent actor meddling in the U.S. election? And how much is your concern that there was some collusion with members of the Trump campaign?
One thing we do know for sure, and no one disagrees, that the Russians tried to interfere in our election. There's no one that I know of that's credible besides Vladimir Putin that would deny it. So that's a fact. And that's why we need to investigate the extent of their involvement, how they did it, what options they used. This whole issue of cyber brings in the whole issue of cyber warfare. There's a lot more that we don't know. But there is no evidence so far that they were able to affect the outcome of the election. I have seen no evidence of that, and I think it's important to emphasize that. But we do know that they're trying to interfere in the French elections. We know that. That's published information. So we have to understand that if Russia had been able to succeed in affecting the outcome of election, they fundamentally destroyed democracy, because one of the most important fundamentals of any democracy is free and fair elections. So we cannot overstate the aspects and impact of a Russian interference in any election, much less ours. So the reason why I think we need a select committee is because there are so many other aspects of, so many unanswered questions concerning this issue, and many of those questions involve other committees as well as the Intelligence Committee.
Thanks, Lawrence Norman of the Wall Street Journal. Do you both believe the Trump administration is reaching the point where it is ready to live with the Iranian nuclear accord?
I'm not sure, because we hear different messages from the administration, but I think there is very appropriately a review of Iranian behavior and whether they have been in compliance with that agreement or not. And there are a number of sources out there that show that they have violated that agreement. But I'm not frankly sure where it is on the priority list of the Trump administration.
I'll only add, one of the reasons both of us were completely opposed to that agreement is that we've funneled at least $100 billion, if not more, into the military and the economy of, let's face it, the largest state-sponsored terror in the world. You can't get that money back. So we're all having to live with it, and that's very, very unfortunate. But again, I think what we need to do is make sure that they're not cheating. They probably will be. It's going to be hard for us to understand whether they are or not, which is another bad part of that deal. But I certainly appreciate the fact that this administration is going to be a strong supporter of Israel. We did confirm David Friedman as ambassador, and that's a good thing. We've got that person in place. And I think we all need to push back on Iran's aggression throughout the Middle East and the world.
Thank you, Senators. I'm Kelsey Glover with the German Marshall Fund. We have several journalists in our network watching live online. They've submitted a question. So this is to Senator McCain from Ryan Heath with Politico. What investments should NATO allies, both civilian and military, be making to understand and expose Russian disinformation campaigns? And are we doing enough?
We're not doing enough, but I don't blame our allies in NATO for that. We in the United States are not doing enough because this is a new form of competition. I use the term warfare in its broadest sense, and we are making some efforts in the United States. This last administration never had a policy, so therefore we never had a strategy, so therefore we treated each attack on an ad hoc basis, which was obviously totally ineffective. This new administration is developing a policy, so therefore we can develop a strategy. I believe that the whole issue of cyber warfare is going to be a predominant issue, not only because of its effect on election campaigns, but its ability to cripple our economies, its ability to shut down major capabilities that people take for granted in their everyday life, such as power plants. and the whole issue of cyber is one that is of the utmost importance and priority. I think there are areas where we are not ready in the United States because of cuts in defense, such as 2/3 of our F-18 are not flying. But the challenge of cyber is a fundamental one, and one that is going to require a lot of effort, a lot of work, and a lot of cooperation. By the way, our friends in Estonia have established a cyber center that I applaud the efforts that they are making there. But, take a couple.
My name is Nawab Khan. I'm the correspondent of the Kuwait news agency Kuna in Brussels. And so my question to you is that, do you see a solution to the Syrian crisis without a political transition? Thank you.
I see abysmal failure. I see 420,000 people dead. I see 6 million refugees. I see a former president of the United States who committed once Bashar Assad crossed the red line, we would take action, and we didn't. I see Russian aircraft with precision weapons striking hospitals. I see a humanitarian disaster of the most monumental consequences, maybe in many respects the largest since the end of World War II. I see an abject failure of American and our allied leadership. That's what I see. And I still believe we could establish a no-fly zone, we could arm the Free Syrian Army, and we could roll back Bashar Assad, who was bailed out by Hezbollah and Russia. So this is a disaster in every sense of the word. The flood of refugees into Europe has put a strain on the New World Order, and the humanitarian effects of this are just colossal. So this administration, I know, is looking at a new strategy, both for in Syria and in Iraq. We are now looking at a new strategy in Afghanistan, where our military commander in Afghanistan said we were in a, quote, stalemate. After 15 years, we're still in a stalemate after the sacrifice of so much American and allied blood and treasure. We are going to pay a very, very heavy price for the last 8 years. I still believe we could establish a no-fly zone to help take care of these refugees and to arm the Free Syrian Army, but it's far, far more complicated than it used to be. Yes.
Irina Sommer, Ukrainian news agency Union. This week, a Ukrainian parliament has called American Congress to conclude a mutual defense treaty with the country and also to grant the major non-NATO allies status. What kind of perspective for this call? You also mentioned that, I quote,
Before we, obviously I would approve, and for many years have approved of a, let her hang on to it, for at least the modalities of Ukrainian entry into NATO. I would say our first priority for Ukraine and the United States is to give Ukraine lethal defensive weapons with which to defend themselves, such as Javelin, such as counter-battery radar and other capabilities, because right now they are outgunned by the so-called separatists. So the first thing I would do, and we are, by the way, I'm happy to say, some American training in Ukraine has been very helpful. And the Ukrainian military has improved dramatically in their capabilities. They just need the equipment to fight with. Go ahead, your second question.
Second question about weapons. You said we have to, but do you really see it will happen? What kind of time frame do you see for this?
I see this administration and our Secretary of Defense in particular, who are very favorably inclined. I cannot predict that result, but I am optimistic because I have to be optimistic because Vladimir Putin has recently stepped up their military activities in eastern Ukraine, as we know. And he will continue to do that as long as he thinks he can get away with it. And at least we owe these people the ability to defend their sovereign nation, which has been invaded by the so-called separatists, and we know who they are. Could I just finally mention, like this latest information of an individual, Magnitsky's lawyer, being thrown from a fourth-floor hotel room, the assassination in Ukraine of one of the leading dissidents. Vladimir Putin is behaving with impunity like the thug and gangster that he is. Go ahead.
I just wanted to add, just to give you some hope, it was pretty extraordinary 2 Congresses ago, and this was from the result of a number of bipartisan congressional delegation trips to Ukraine, the courage of the Ukrainian people. Unanimously, the United States Congress voted for lethal defensive weaponry for Ukraine. We reaffirmed that in the last Congress with a resolution. So there's strong support, bipartisan support, unanimous support in Congress to provide the courageous people in Ukraine trying to protect their territorial integrity, trying to protect their democracy, the help that they actually need to push back Vladimir Putin's aggression. So, hopefully we've got a new administration that will listen to what Congress voted for and provide that help.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.